It's often with biopics, you've got two audiences in mind. You've got the people who don't know who it is you're making the film about, and you've got the rabid fans too. And it seems like a tightrope that you'd have to walk.
The way I look at it is that there is no tightrope really to walk. You just kind of have to do what you think is the right thing to do. But I think that I certainly don't believe, and I didn't go into it thinking I've got to satisfy any group of people. In fact, when I talked to the family, and it's a pretty complicated family, as you can imagine, I told them first time I talked to all of them sort of separately, and they said, well, we think this and we think this. And I said, the truth is I hate talking to families when you're making a movie about families.
You said that to them.
I said it to them. I said, because all of y'all have different ideas. And I said, I can't really try to satisfy you and make you happy. I can just do what I think is the best for the film as I've, imagined it.
It was based on a book, so you had that as a starting point. But there are probably so many biopics that have died a borning because of questions of rights. And this one in particular, it's all about the music.
Well, it was a really interesting situation in that sense because I didn't really option the book until after I'd finished the script. I wrote the script. A lot of people were talking about the rights, and rights are incredibly complicated, as we all know, and everybody in this room certainly knows. And I'd done enough different things that I decided, with some help from a lawyer that I talked to, that Hank's rights were public. He was public domain in terms of Hank. He's a very famous person. He'd been written about in millions of different ways. There's 37 different books that I looked at personally, not to mention all the magazine articles. And so I was told, well, you'll need the family, you'll need this and that. And I said, I don't think so. And so I wrote the script without anybody's rights, any of the family's rights. And then I had read all these different books, but Colin Escott's book was by far the best. It was academic, it wasn't dry, it was really, really thorough. I really was impressed with it. My copy looks like the Gutenberg Bible. It's so old and torn up and pasted, and I did that. And then once I realized what the film was going to be and what I narrowed down to shoot and so forth, and I understood who the different people were who were still alive, whose rights I would need. I went to them. For instance, the gal who plays Billie Jean. Billie Jean is the 19-year-old that he married at the end of his life. He married her in October. He died in December, as you know, and Billie Jean's still alive. And she's one of the few. So is Lucretia, the daughter, who was his stepdaughter, Audrey's girl. She's still alive. And I went to them because they're alive, and I didn't, even though they're represented very, carefully in the thing. And Billie Jean is, I don't know how old Billie Jean is now, but she's up there, and she has a minder. And I really want to make sure she was okay. And I didn't know in what sense Billie Jean was that cogent about stuff. And when I talked to Betty, the woman who looked after her, Betty said, well, she comes in and out. What do you want to do? And I said, well, I want her to be okay. I said, but I've written it as I have understood it. And she said, okay. So she said, well, why don't you send a script to me? So I sent the script. And Billie Jean she's got fire red hair now. I mean, just she was a beautiful woman and just red like your hair is, actually. And Betty read her the stuff, the last of it. And I said, so Betty called me and she said, you're good to go. I said, what did Billie Jean say? She said, hell, that's funky and I'm funky.
I'd say that was a yes.
So I said, all right, that's good by me.
There were so many ways to approach his life.
Yes.
Why did you make the choices that you did in terms of, we meet him pretty much as an adult and we see a musical career and a personal career, and bring in a bit of Hollywood, bring in a bit of New York? How did you make those choices?
I love that, because that to me was the fundamental question about how I was going to make the movie. I kind of hate the word biopic. What I felt like is that I've never am very interested in stories about analyzing how someone becomes who they are. So I never wanted to tell the story from the cradle to the grave. It was really important to me not to do that. Many of the filmmakers who I admire, and people that I could use their names, but I don't put myself anywhere near their class of people. But whether you're talking about a Bob Fosse or you're talking about those kinds of films that made films about various people, or never did that as well. And I love those pictures. I knew that he was taught how to play the guitar by an elderly African-American guy named T. Todd. I knew everything about him, but I wasn't interested in it. I didn't, in the sense that that's not that unusual to me. Somebody had to teach him how to play the guitar. At the same time, I was adamant that I didn't want to have any scenes in the film where he was shown really writing. Those scenes are really rough. When you show somebody sitting down and having inspiration and some epiphany, and I just find them hard to believe. So I made up my mind, and I've been criticized for it by various people. Well, why don't you show him how great he was? And I said, well, I don't know how to explain how great. And I don't know how to explain how a kid out of the dirt from Mount Olive, Alabama, could actually do what he did. I often say this. If you can explain to me how Bob Zimmerman from Hibbing, Minnesota, whose dad ran a furniture store, becomes Bob Dylan, I'll explain Hank Williams. So I just felt like what I wanted to try to do and did to the best of my ability to accomplish was to show his life. That these lives, that this young man and his relationships, his difficult, tempestuous relationships with his first wife, with women in general, the burden that caused, and so often much art is created out of that between men and women. Whether it's a woman as an artist or a man as an artist, somewhere their relationships have profound influence. And I thought, well, I'm going to show his life. Actually, the things, sometimes mundane, sometimes banal, sometimes things that we all understand, these are the things that took place. And from that, you will understand where his music came from.
Did it make a difference in getting the picture made that you had Tom Hiddleston, who was so committed, I guess, to the role?
Well, in the beginning, the funny thing about Tom, and it's such an honor to be here at the Academy because I've been a member for, I don't know, a while, and it's a big deal. But I was thinking when I was walking in here but then I remember the first time I saw Tom Hiddleston was in the Academy because it was a premiere for War Horse. Mm. And when I asked Tom to do the movie, nobody knew who Tom was. Thor hadn't come out, Avengers hadn't come out. He was a very unknown actor. But I was completely taken with him, and it was a complete gut decision that he was the guy. And in fact, it wasn't of any value to me at all. When as I tell the story, friends of mine, he said it started out like this. First, I tell them I've hired Tom Hiddleston, or I've asked Tom Hiddleston to be in the movie, and people said, "Who's Tom Hiddleston? What are you talking about?" And then about 8 months later, they went, "Well, why'd you hire Tom Hiddleston?" And then about 6 months after that, everybody said, "Hey, man, how'd you get Tom Hiddleston?" So, I think it helped. I hope it helps people go see the movie. But I think that, in fact, by the time the movie was being made, it was of value. And Elizabeth as well, who I just adore in the movie. She plays Audrey, Elizabeth Olsen. I just think she gives such a fantastic performance, and she's such a great talent.
He's been dead for so long that people have almost separated him from his music.
Yes.
People know the covers to the music rather than the original. And yet he came in at a time and was a crossover figure when the late 40s, early 50s, as far as I could tell, was sort of a desert of pop music. I mean, how much is that Doggy in the Window hit #1? This is before Elvis, before the Beatles. So the significance of his character of his musical contributions, can't be underestimated. And it came through to me that that's one point you wanted to make.
It was. Because I approached Hank, even though I grew up in the South, I grew up in Kentucky, in Louisville, Kentucky, which is not really the South, but if you ask everybody in Louisville, Kentucky, they think they're Southern. But it's the Midwest, really. But it's 3 hours north of Nashville, and I was a huge country music fan, so I've always known the music. However, the thing that I was always moved by was what a brilliant writer he was. And many of my friends who are writers and that I know had talked about him as one of the greatest poets of the 20th century, American poets. And I do believe that. And so, I mean, at the time, if you think about what he did, first of all, Bing Crosby was gigantic then, and everybody wanted to sing like Bing Crosby. Bob Dylan still talks about singing and said, well, everybody wants to sing like, Bing Crosby. In terms of Hank, to me, what his what was most significant was his writing. I mean, here's a man, when you think of the pop stuff that was being written at the time, and yes, How Much Is a Dog, but also, Springtime, beautiful songs by some really, Tony Bennett and so forth. But no man was singing, I'm so lonesome I could cry. No way. And then also pouring out their heart, these profoundly sad song of, in anger, unkind words are said that make the teardrops start. How can I free your doubtful mind and melt your cold, cold heart? And that's why I started the movie the way I did, because I knew a lot of people wouldn't know his music in that way. And I wanted and hoped it would resonated for the people that were here today, for you all, to be able to watch and just be forced to listen to his poetry. And that's why I started it, sort of out of place and out of time.
The use of narrators. You've got the Bradley Whitford character, yes. Fred Rose. Is it Fred?
Fred Rose.
Fred Rose, and you bring those voices in. To what purpose? Why did you think you needed those?
Well, Fred was a profound influence on Hank. By the way, Fred Rose was a songwriter himself. You know the song that Willie sang, and you've heard Linda Ronstadt say, Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain? Fred Rose wrote that song, and that's why Hank had such respect for him. The reason I did that was I feel like I just have such I can't stand when I have to listen to, in a story, to a lot of exposition. And when I try to write my dialogue so that there's no exposition in it, because very rarely do people have exposition when you're talking. Remember when we met at so-and-so? So I felt like, how do I get around having Hank and all this information be disseminated so that these relationships and these conversations that take place can take place between people and have them be real. That's why in some of the conversations, they don't even answer each other. He asks a question and she asks him another question. And so I kind of cribbed it, to be honest. Lenny uses it in Bob Fosse's movie Lenny, the Dustin Hoffman film, and he used some footage like that when his wife's interviewed Valerie Perrine, and I kind of thought, I love that idea, and so I sort of stole that from Mr. Fosse.
Please thank Marc Abraham.
Thank you.